The heart is found in the thoracic cavity. That's the cavity above the diaphragm. And the heart is in a space between the lungs called the mediastinum. So I'm going to remove the upper part of each lung so we get a better look at the heart. So the heart sits in the mediastinum, which is the space between the lungs. This right here would be the diaphragm, and you can see the apex of the heart rests on top of the diaphragm. These great vessels associated with the heart come out of what's called the base of the heart. So this would be the right ventricle pumping blood into the pulmonary trunk. You can see the left ventricle pumps its blood into the aorta. Here would be the superior vena cava, and the inferior vena cava would be down below. So this just gives kind of a sense where the heart is located. This is a 3/4 size model. In our bodies at full size, the heart is approximately the size of your fist. The heart is angled towards the left side of the body. So I'm going to pull this down, and then we'll take a look at this heart model. So the heart has 4 chambers. There's 2 upper chambers, the atria, and the 2 lower chambers, the ventricles. There are expandable pouches on the sides of each of the atria called auricles. The great vessels here, pulmonary trunk, aorta, several others, are coming out of the base of the heart. And this would be the apex of the heart that is resting on top of the diaphragm. So there are several blood vessels that you can see associated with the heart. This would be the right ventricle pumping blood into a blue-colored artery called the pulmonary trunk. And the pulmonary trunk branches to become 2 pulmonary arteries. A right pulmonary artery to the right lung, and a left pulmonary artery to the left lung. Off the aorta are several large arteries that are part of the systemic circuit. The brachiocephalic goes to the right subclavian and the right common carotid. This would be the left common carotid, and then this one all the way over on this side would be the left subclavian. So the left subclavian artery, the right subclavian artery, the right common carotid, and the left common carotid, and this blood vessel up to here, to the point where it splits, is the brachiocephalic artery. All of these red colored arteries are part of the systemic circuit. The superior vena cava and inferior vena cava drain the venous return from the systemic circuit into the right atrium of the heart. There are 2 pairs of pulmonary veins, a pair from each lung, and they drain blood from the pulmonary circuit into the left atrium. So this would be a pair of red-colored pulmonary veins from the left lung going into the left atrium. And the left atrium goes all the way across the back of the heart. And there's actually a portion of the left atrium behind the right atrium. And this is where a pair of red-colored pulmonary veins from the right lung drain into the left atrium. So there's a pair of pulmonary veins from the right lung and a pair of red-colored pulmonary veins from the left lung, bringing the venous return from the pulmonary circuit into the left atrium. There's several blood vessels on the surface of the heart that I want you to know. There's 2 that come off the base of the aorta. And one of those is the right coronary artery between the right atrium and the right ventricle. And right next to the right coronary artery is where the left coronary artery begins. You can't see where it begins because it's behind the pulmonary trunk. So the left coronary artery arises here at the base of the aorta, then goes behind the pulmonary trunk, and we see it just about a 1/4 inch of it right there. And that's where the left coronary artery splits into an interventricular artery and the circumflex artery. There's a vein that you can see in the back of the heart called the coronary sinus. And the coronary sinus is a vein that receives drainage from veins within the wall of the heart, and the venous blood in the coronary sinus drains directly into the right atrium. Okay, I'm going to open up the top of the right atrium and the top of the right ventricle. So the blood comes into the right atrium by way of the superior and inferior vena cava. And then from the right atrium, the blood goes through this hole down into the right ventricle. And this opening between the right atrium and the right ventricle is protected by the right AV valve. It's made of 3 flaps or 3 cusps. So it's the tricuspid valve. There are ridges of cardiac muscle that line the atria, and they're referred to as the pectinate muscles. And there are ridges that line the ventricles, and they would be called the trabeculi carni. Coming back to the tricuspid valve, or the right AV valve, there are strings made of fibrous connective tissue coming off the edges of the flaps of the valves called chordae tendineae. And they attach to columns of muscle coming off the ventricular wall called papillary muscles. So if I open up the top of the left atrium and the left ventricle, we can see the pulmonary veins, a pair from each lung, delivering blood from the pulmonary circuit into the left atrium. That blood then goes down into the left ventricle. So this would be one of the 2 flaps associated with the left AV valve, which is the mitral valve or bicuspid valve. And coming off the edges of those flaps would be the chordae tendineae attached to the papillary muscles. Now when the right ventricle contracts, its blood goes through the pulmonary semilunar valve into the blue-colored pulmonary trunk artery, and then the pulmonary trunk divides into pulmonary arteries that send blood to the lungs, where it eventually would circulate through the pulmonary capillaries, picking up oxygen and getting rid of CO2. When the left ventricle contracts, it pumps its blood, and it's a little tough to see, through the aortic semilunar valve into the aorta, and this blood travels with the systemic circuit to systemic capillaries. There is a wall of cardiac muscle between the 2 ventricles, and that is the interventricular septum. And then there's a wall of cardiac muscle between the 2 atria, the interatrial septum. So this would be the interventricular septum, and then tapping here would be the interatrial septum. There's 2 structures that are remnants of the fetal circulation, and they include the ligamentum arteriosum, which is the sealed off ductus arteriosus. The ductus arteriosus is a part of the fetal circulation that helps to bypass the pulmonary circuit to the lungs, because the fetal lungs are non-functional. And there's a structure in here that has a whitish color to it called the fossa ovalis. It's in the interatrial septum. and it's a remnant of a fetal structure called the foramen ovale. The foramen ovale is a hole in the inner atrial septum that seals off at birth to form the fossa ovalis, and the ductus arteriosus is a duct or tube between the pulmonary trunk and the aorta. It seals off at birth to become the ligamentum arteriosum. So the structures you see in an adult heart would be the fossa ovalis, the sealed off foramen ovale that was present in the fetal heart, and the ligamentum arteriosum is what you see in an adult heart, and that's the sealed off ductus arteriosus that was present in the fetal heart.